It's about being comfortable with the uncomfortable, making a habit out of that. And I think I had been very prepared through my father's death and then living alone and trying to create a life out of that to get to a point where once I felt alone again and where I couldn't travel and depend on travel to reset my mental health, all I could do was to hone on past experiences of embracing discomfort and becoming, as you said, one with the waves, one with chaos. And going back to your Russia story, I know it's travel and whatnot, but we always say at the end of the day, you can either have a good trip or a good story. That's the story you remember. If everything went hunky dory and according to plan, you're going to be like, it was a good trip. You're not going to be bringing it up in a podcast with someone you just met. You are proud of that story. And not, I don't want to minimize what happened with COVID because that was people died, but the feeling of being comfortable with chaos and saying, we're going to get out of this. And I'm going to remember this. I'm going to honor it. I'm going to properly grieve it when it's time to. But until I get to that point, until I deserve that space to be able to grieve properly, I'm going to become one with chaos and just go with the waves. Because if I freak out or leave or not show up to work, because I had the means to as a per diem doctor, I could have chosen not to show up. I didn't never sign a full-time contract. I ended up with my freedom to work wherever I wanted, showing up more often in more places than I expected to.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to the Men on Purpose podcast. I'm your host, Ian Lobos. Today, I just got off this really magical ride with Dr. Calvin's son. And I mean, the guy is just, what an incredible story. A father passed away when he was young, like literally right after an argument. His dad got on a treadmill and died. Okay. I'm not spoiling it. You're going to have to listen. He dropped some real gold bombs in here. And then, you know, he starts traveling the world and learning about himself and learning how to trust himself. And he becomes a doctor. And then he's a doctor in the ER during COVID. And we talk about living a double life, like the life your parents wanted and the life that you wanted. And we talk about pushing yourself against a boulder and life feeling like that. Talk about being comfortable with uncomfortable, trusting the process of your life, learning how to trust yourself, learning how to love yourself, how travel can help you unlock those things that are kind of caught up inside, getting over resentment and regret, especially with the death of a parent, becoming a doctor. I talk about my dad and a story about my dad and I, and you're going to catch that right in the middle of the episode. Being alone, having freedom, and keeping your integrity intact. And there's a lot of other little things in here. It's a very powerful, quick episode. It's not as long as the other ones. Just, you know, he was calling from the Faroe Islands. If you don't know where they are, Google them. I had to. It's up by Scotland and Iceland. And the guy's just living an incredible life. And it's because he made a choice to keep pushing forward, realizing that he was worth it and that he was valuable. And I really just appreciated who this guy is and the human that he is for the world and the model he is as a man on purpose. And so we're going to talk about a lot of cool stuff. Right now, I'm not even going to read you his bio. He's a doctor. He traveled 200 countries. He's done some really amazing stuff. There's your bio. He wrote a cool book called Monsoon Diaries. It's awesome, right? Let's get into the episode real quick before we do. Make sure you go to our new website, menonpurpose.net, menonpurpose.net. Download our free purpose-driven formula mini course and ebook. Also, if you haven't yet, please join our Men on Purpose community. Got a lot of cool stuff, free content, a lot of cool stuff going on in there, a lot of support and structure. You know, just guys hanging and talking and being authentic and vulnerable and open and honest with each other about what shit they're experiencing. And that's it, right? That's it. Look, we are going through a transition right now in Men on Purpose where we are helping men become irreplaceable as husbands, as fathers, as humans, as business owners and managers and leaders. And you are going to hear that more and more and more and more. After this episode, it's going to keep getting more and more. And inside the community, we're going to keep getting more and more as we talk about our 5 pillars, our self, our spouse, our kids, our career, and our community, and how we can be the best version of us. And it all starts with us. You got to commit to the work on you. You must. If you don't think you're worth it, if you don't trust yourself to stick with it, that's fine. We can deal with that. All you got to do is raise your hand and say, you know what? The cycle I'm on, the ride I'm on, this conveyor belt, this path I'm on, it's not right. I don't feel aligned. I need help. We'll help you. We'll help you get your vision, your mission, and your purpose. We'll help you with all the skills to evolve your entire freaking being, goal setting, talking with your wife and kids, whatever it might be, making more money. It all comes because of your growth, your life growth to the extent that you do. So let's get rocking on this episode. Appreciate all of you. Enjoy. All right, Calvin, let's get rocking here, man. First of all, welcome to the podcast. Really appreciate having you on, and this really interesting and pretty amazing story that you have that you're going to share with our audience. I'm excited about that, man.
Thanks for having me. It's good to be here.
Yeah, of course. I love the travel part of your life, and I want to get into that. First and foremost, what I like to do on here is I like to dig in to the past. Do you think you had a hard childhood?
Let's get into that time machine, man.
Yeah.
If we want to. I mean, I've been reliving this over and over. I mean, the past lives along with the present. The answer is yes. I had a hard childhood, but didn't really all of us. And
yeah, of course.
Yeah, and it's just how we live with that. You need to choose to ignore it and try to move on, or you just confront it head on. And I get into that time machine over and over and over again. When I was writing my book, it was kind of like therapy, just to go back and try to honor it, try to properly grieve it, try to go through it, so that you can live in the present and be like, you know what, I feel today's a little easier now, despite the childhood, or because of it.
Yeah. Go dig into that. I want the audience to understand that, like, although you're calling me from the Faroe Islands and you travel every month or every week and you live this pretty amazing life, there's this past that you have that I just talk to them about that, because that is what we all it's almost like the glue that bonds us, right? Nobody escaped childhood without any trauma. No one escaped childhood without any stuff from their parents or their school or their society or their lacrosse team or whatever it was.
I was on the
What was
lacrosse
your
team.
childhood? Yeah, I did not know that.
That was traumatic, literally and figuratively.
Yeah. It's very primal, lacrosse, chasing each other around with a stick and like throwing stuff at each other and checking each other. I enjoyed lacrosse.
We did that. Yeah, in a young
Right.
age. I mean, it was like living a double life. I mean, we're gonna go with lacrosse as a good segue organically. I would like sneak out from the library after my parents dropped me off, because they would make sure that I would study all the time, and then I'll go to lacrosse practice in between, and then run back after practice, be at the library again, and then say, yeah, I was here the whole time. And that's what childhood is like. It was so hard. I had to live a double life at the age of like 11, 12. I mean, all of us did subconsciously. Wow. But I had made it a habit, and it wasn't healthy for me, because it was that split personality, Batman and Bruce Wayne, Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde. So yeah, that was difficult. Childhood was one where like I didn't know what I wanted. There was a part where I thought I was fed what I wanted from my parents, and I'm grateful to them. They gave me an education, a roof over my head. They fed me, clothed me. Like, I know they loved me in their way, but there's another part of me that's like, the things they want me to do for my career, my future, do they really know better than I did? Why did I feel wrong about hearing what they said? And do I honor that feeling wrong, or should I just give into that? Or should I start thinking for myself and finding where I begin and they end?
When you said they love me in their way, I guess, like, there's so many people that say that to me that I coach or that I run into. They'll say, my parents did the best they could. They loved me in their way. I think about my parents. My parents were great to me. They loved me. They did their thing. They traumatized me too. And I almost feel like, as a parent today, that I have a responsibility to my kids to do my personal development work, my soul searching, my deep level work from the past, so that I don't pass that stuff on like our parents did to us. Did you ever deal with that? I mean, like, actually move through that whole statement of, my parents love me, they're in their way. Did you ever talk to them about how you wanted to be loved when you figured it out as an adult?
Yeah, we're assuming that they even know the language how to
Right.
communicate a language that's so
Right.
that's we're more accustomed to speaking to our friends or the people in our generation. But think to what our parents went through. I mean, I guess my parents and maybe your parents didn't get around a table and talk about mental health and traumas in
No,
their childhood. They were, I think it saved us for a lot of us. They were trying to put food on the table. They were trying to survive, and they're like, you know what? As long as we're breathing and the kids fed, that's good enough. They should be grateful for everything else, and then we have every right to show that they're human too. Their
sure.
frustrations, which may be taken out on us because we are the vulnerable ones, instead of trying
Yeah.
to shelter us. Not all of us had parents that had the privilege to be very comfortable and take us out and talk to us about our emotions and being able to know what a self-actualization meant. But we talk about it all the time with our peers now. It's a language that we're more accustomed to. And yes, and when it is our responsibility with that extra privilege to be able to talk about this now that we're comfortable, we don't have to we don't want to worry about putting food at the table for our kids. So the best we can do is emotionally shelter them in a way that our parents did not. And we don't want to blame our parents either, because it was harder for them
Yeah.
back then than it would
Sure.
be for us right now.
You know what's interesting? I couldn't imagine with my inner circle friends, maybe not some like acquaintances. I couldn't imagine with my inner circle friends not sharing myself like vulnerably and openly and honestly and sharing, hey man, I'm kind of going through some stuff with my wife, or I'm kind of going through some stuff with my business, or I'm really struggling about this growth piece in me. I couldn't imagine not doing that. I also can't imagine our parents sitting around drinking, Miller Lights with a pool tab around a shag carpet with green painted wall basement and going, I'm really feeling vulnerable today. That's just not something that I can picture. It's interesting how the generations and men have evolved, yet there's so much more evolution to go. It's still, I, I wouldn't imagine that. And my kids, like I was telling somebody today, was asking me about my morning routine and how I stay consistent and how I wake up at really early times, 4:35 in the morning, and what am I motivated to do? And I said, sometimes when I find that I'm not motivated to get up and do something, like I'm at my parents' house now and going back to LA, which is where home is in a week, I'm I'm getting up because I want to stay consistent with my sleep schedule and even on weekends, and I go in and I'll look at my kids sleeping and I'll speak to them with gratitude and love and openness and tell them how they've impacted my life. And then when they get up, I'll tell them about what I shared with them. And I'll share it with them from a place where they can understand that dad's communicating his feelings and his emotions to us. So it's not weird for a guy to do that. And I'm working to change that dynamic for the next generation.
That's awesome. I'm going to take some
Yeah.
notes down. How old are your kids when you started doing that? Because I want to make sure they like. It's not like I want to take my 2-year-old to a country. They're not going to remember that. But what's the age when you can talk to them? They're like, yeah, I remember you said did that when I was growing
You
up.
know, dude, I have I remember when my daughter was born and I was very emotional because life was changing, right? It wasn't about me anymore. It wasn't about just my wife and I and picking up and going and
Mm,
doing what we wanted. It was about like, okay, now you have to grow up. You have to become the man that you're supposed to be for this person to lead them. This isn't like hey, kids are better seen than heard. You fit into my life kind of deal.
mm,
There is an
mm,
aspect of the fit into my life. I started talking to her when she was born.
mm.
And then I think at about 2 to 2.5 years old, she started very early with talking, very early with potty training. Like she potty trained herself. She was full sentences by probably a year and a half. Like she's super, super smart kid. And I would bring her with me and sit her little body in the sink next to me at like 5 a.m. And she would watch me do affirmations and brush my teeth and drink water and do this little morning routine. And eventually, I'm going to tell you right now, I have a video of her at like 2.5 years old doing affirmations in the mirror
Wow.
with me. And then I have a video that's really cool of her at 3.5 standing up on top of the counter, like fist pumping in the mirror, like, I am smart. I am beautiful. Like the
That's
affirmations
awesome.
that she learned from me. And I just said to her, hey, these are my affirmations. If you'd like me to teach you some, I can. And that's what we did. So honestly, dude, I would say from day one, I started
Start from the
practicing the
womb.
habit of sharing. Yeah,
That's
sharing with
awesome.
her. And it's not about teaching her what I was doing. It was about including her in the process, where I know a lot of men who I speak with are like, man, I just can't get a break. I got a newborn at home, or I got a young
Yeah.
kid. I can't get a morning routine. And go, grab them. You want to influence your kid? Let them sit and watch you sit in a meditative pose for 10 minutes. Let them play
Mhm.
around you. I think that's super cool.
Yeah. Live
Yeah.
by example. Set the example from day one and make it their habit and your habits too, the ones that you're grateful for. And I think that is going back to our parents. Maybe their good enough was the best and was good enough. And
Sure.
that's how we got to this point. I mean, here we are in spite of, because maybe we are, because we learned we could do better. And our parents did so much that they could to get us here. And I think we could be grateful for that. Here we are talking about these things. I mean, maybe our parents
You
didn't
think
do
you'd
this
be in
on the
the
shag carpet, but you
right, right. You think you'd be in the same position if you didn't have that type of struggle? And I ask this question a lot.
it's
I
so
wonder about our kids and the lack
it's
of struggle because we're pushing and providing for them.
yeah, it's this dilemma that I go through. And I like write in my book about how I lost my father when I was a teenager. He died suddenly after we had an argument, and one of those many arguments we had. And after he died, that's when my life hit this inflection point where I see this before and after. And the short answer is, yeah, I think we got to this point because of what happened to me, that I learned how to be independent. And my father being so difficult and strict on me, and then all of a sudden disappearing, was the kind of the fire I needed to get to where I am right now. But then there's another part of me that wonder, if he had stayed alive, would I still have the motivation in me to be able to
Sure.
live for myself? And that's why I admire some people who have it all. No one dies, everything's hunky dory, and then they still go, something's off. I need to live for myself. And
Huh.
I have really no spark, except for the one that lives within me, to finally one day randomly decide to leave it all behind and live for themselves. And I go back and forth. I mean, obviously that didn't happen in this multiverse or this version of the multiverse, but I am, very grateful to have had my father's presence in my life as long as he lived, and then his sudden loss is, I think, also a crucial point in to getting me to where I
Sure.
am today.
Can you talk a little bit about that? I mean, now I'm curious. I've read your bio. It's just
Mm.
I didn't understand that part, which is after an argument and he was just gone. What can you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, it was so sudden. He was such a big presence in my life in an emotional sense, not physically, unless the times he was actually physically home. Uh, long story short, he was very strict, and he pretty much carved my entire life out for me. He told me to be a doctor. I didn't even have a choice between engineer,
Mhm.
banker, or lawyer, which is on par for the course. I didn't get a choice. And he structured it out for me. He was very strict about with all these rules. And the privilege was the education that he provided for me, making sure that I would always be disciplined in going to class and studying really hard, even though I was a really bad student. And he would move me from schools and send me to Saturday schools and music school, and just to buff up, my what my brain could be capable of. And I would just go. And then as I grew up, I knew something was wrong, and I started rebelling. I don't know if that's a natural part of me or being influenced by growing up in New York City. Maybe he should have
Sure.
raised me in a quieter place, but
Sure.
I became a rebel, and it became my boulder. And when I was 19, and we would argue a lot. And when I was 19, after another argument, he went to a treadmill and dropped dead from a sudden heart attack.
Damn.
And in the context of things, it was a week after he had told me he was proud of me for the first time. Randomly, we were at like a
Wow.
buffet place in Chinatown, $3 buffet. You get a mountain of rice and your choice of 3 vegetables. And he just sat down. I was like, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I'm proud of you. And I'm like, what? Like, what is going on? Is
Yeah.
it, I was gonna say, like, are you dying? And I'm like, literally, I didn't know, but he didn't know. And the closest thing I can explain is like I was reading Joan Didion's book, A Year in Magical Thinking, that week, and she said that her husband, right before he passed, would just act in a certain way, like his DNA and cells
He
knew that
knew,
he was,
yeah.
but he didn't know consciously. And I think that's my dad's heart cells were like, "You're gonna die in a week," and somehow the transit his brain. It's like I got to tell him, but he was confused too. He's like, "Well, I don't know why I'm telling you this, but I guess I'll explain it later." I don't know. He just came out of his mouth. He looked shocked, and a week later he died. And part of me wonder, was it because we argued? So it feels like you're pushing a boulder your entire life, and the boulder just vanishing, and now you fall over.
Yeah.
And you're like, what do I do now? And it's really weird when you're like looking around you. And it's like, okay, what do I do now? Because I've been pushing all my life. I have nothing to push against. So you feel useless. You feel helpless. And now no one's telling you what to do with your life. My mom got diagnosed with Parkinson's that summer, and she was living with her parents. I went from my family to being alone. And my dad was only around on the weekends. He had his business in Connecticut. My mom was dealing with taking care of this motel. So I only saw them on weekends. I was raised by a family of babysitters. So I went from weird family dynamic to just myself, all in the summer between my sophomore and junior year of college. And that was a head trip. It was the worst and best summer of my life, is how I like to frame it looking back.
Damn, man. That is heavy. That's super heavy. What about regret and resentment? How did you process through that? Because there's somebody listening right now that's like, I went through something like that and I'm still reeling from it 5 years later or 10 years later. Do you think you've gotten over it, or can you get over it? And how did you deal with the resentment and the regret of not just the childhood you had and the strict, this is what you're going to do. You're kind of like my little puppet. And then all of a sudden your dad left you, and there's another amount of regret and resentment that's like, why the fuck did you leave me? Why'd you leave me, man? Like, you just told me you were proud of me. Shit was turning, and then you left me.
Right. Such a tease. He teased me.
Yeah. Yeah.
The regret comes from the not being able to communicate it with him sooner. And it was very sad for me, because I was cleaning out his stuff the week of his funeral, and I found these diaries that he wrote to my older brother, who's 14 years older than I am. Same father, different mothers. He's exactly like my brother, but half brothers. And he would write, how much my brother meant to him during the divorce when my brother was growing up, hoping that my brother would eventually read it. The irony is that I ended up reading them. My brother still refuses to read them. And, I know what my dad is capable of being able to convey that he was proud of a son and that he had emotions for a son, but he never communicated to me, except indirectly through a diary to another brother. That really screws with your head, because what now he's capable of. And you go the resentment may be from, now I know what you're capable of. You could have gotten away saying, hey, I just don't know how to communicate. I don't know how to write and speak to a son about emotions. But then you see this evidence and like, oh, why didn't he do that with me? Kind of give me a little bit, but where are my diaries? Where are the diaries he wrote to me? And it doesn't exist. So how do you get over that? Is you have to start getting up. What happens when you push a boulder and disappears? What would you do? You look around, and then you start using that as, rather than something that, oh, this happened to me, I deserve this, or bad things happen to me. Instead of that, just saying, how can this be an opportunity for me to start anew? Most people would kill for the chance for a reset in their lives, wherever you are, whoever is listening. Just like, oh man, things are not going the way I want. Can I just have a reset? You want to reset your computer when you have too many tabs open. It's kind of a relief. Like, just pull the plug, and it's like, yes, I can start with a clean slate. And that, to me, as terrible as it was the only way I could really survive that summer. Was like, could this be a clean slate for me? And that's when I decided not to become a doctor, not to live for myself, to become a bartender, to do the job I love the most. I was a bartender on campus, Columbia Bartending Agency. It was the best paying job. And I kind of just stuck to that. I was also in student council. So I was like, I want to do that. And then I didn't have to live a double life. I was hiding all that stuff away from my parents. So that was step one. That also then becomes, a factor of resentment and regret. It's like, now I don't know if I'm doing these things to rebel against my late father for the rest of my life, or is it really coming from me? and then you do this little dance. It's like the poison cup scene from The Princess Bride. You don't know which cup is the poison cup, so you might as well just drink one of them.
What's up, guys? I'm so sorry to interrupt the episode. I just need 1 minute to share with you all the new and exciting, amazing stuff we've got created here at Men on Purpose. First of all, thank you for listening to the podcast and supporting the movement we're creating for all the men in the world. Next, you've got to check out our new website, menonpurpose.net, where you'll find all kinds of cool stuff, including links to our podcast and the free Men on Purpose community. You're also going to find our new free purpose-driven formula mini course and ebook, and links to all of our new coaching programs and products. Look, I've had so many of you ask me where to get started with your personal growth journey or where you can go to level up. So I put this thing together, this free ebook and mini course, and we're going to be talking about and coaching you through a really light version of our purpose-driven formula, which is our foundational formula. And for those of you who are ready now, we got you. Listen up, whether it's becoming the best husband, being the best dad, quitting that job that doesn't serve you, or just understanding how to put you first, we've got what you need to align with your authentic self and find that true fulfillment and live a life with no regrets. Look, we're helping men with structure, support, and sustainability. That's what you've asked for, and that's what we deliver. As we lead you through proven and tested curriculum that focuses on formulas to help you get farther faster. So make sure you go to menonpurpose.net, click the button to download our free, powerful, purpose-driven formula mini course and ebook. And while you're there, make sure you check out some of our amazing products designed to help you find your purpose, stop self-sabotage, and dial in your mindset, skills, and habits to evolve into the best version of you. Why? Because we want you to live and have the best life possible. No regrets. So, menonpurpose.net, let's get back to the episode. You know, what's interesting about what you're saying there with the communication from our parents is that I realized that I had some resentment toward my dad. And for those listeners that know the episodes that my dad and I do on this podcast, my dad and I are extremely close. You couldn't get any closer. Yet in like 2018, 2019, I felt like there was this tennis ball. Like if you hug somebody, you could feel them, feel their cheek, their warmth. You got your hands around them. But there was a tennis ball between our chests. Something was there, and I kept feeling it. I kept feeling like this anger come up. And I realized through letting shit go, removing distractions that were in the way, I realized that it was that he hadn't told me he loved me in a very long time, and he hadn't told me that he was proud of me. He showed me, it was inherent. Every single thing he did, he lived for me, like he lives for me. Still, like I call him every day. We talk all the time. All my business advice, I go to him even before the coaches that I pay money to. I was still angry at something. And I started to release distractions and shit in the way. And what I realized was that he wasn't saying those things to me. And I thought, how could a dad not tell his son that he loves him? That's so messed up. And I remember on my wedding day, I was so nervous. And I even said to my wife that day, I was like, oh, my dad says he loves me or something like that. Like, I feel like profound. He's supposed to say it today, right?
Yeah.
And when I got up the courage to speak with my dad about this, and I really had a beautiful open conversation because it was my job to clear the future, right? Clear the present and open up the entire future of possibilities for our relationship to not have anything in between. He said to me, I'm sorry. Like I didn't realize that's something you needed. And I said, no, it's not your fault. It's my fault. Because I realized I didn't create a space for you to feel safe. And he said to me, well, you know, thinking about that, the reason why I was apprehensive is because your mother could leave. My daughter-in-law, your wife could leave. Your kids could be out of my life. But you're the one that could crush me and end my existence. And this is what he's saying to me, when my mother died when I was 11, I didn't tell her I loved her. She told me, and it crushed me and it crushed her. And then she died just like your dad. Like he went to school. She said, stay with me today. She had cancer and he went to school. And 6 hours later, his dad came to pick him up. His mom was gone. And so he said to me, I feel like if I said it to you, or he said to me, thank you for opening this up. I feel like if I said it to you and you didn't say it back, it would crush me and it would bring me back to that day with my mom. So the point of that story is our parents are humans too, and they need help to open up. And I think as their children, it's our job to give them the tools and skills necessary to communicate effectively with us so that we can open up whatever that block is. And that day, both my dad and I were now freed from anything that had happened in like the 36 years or 35, whatever it was, years that I've been on this planet. And it was a beautiful thing. And from that opening, it created a different relationship between my dad and my wife, my mom and my dad and his employees. Like crazy stuff opened up because I freed him from that thing he's been holding on to for like 50 years, 50 plus years. Kind of crazy. And it's our responsibility. Honestly, it's not just with the kids, with our parents.
Sounds like there was this fear. And one of my favorite movies growing up was Fight Club. And one of the quotes is like, our fathers are models for God. And that's what we grow up thinking as children. I mean, that we needed to create this world, to feel safe and secure as children because we're so vulnerable. But as we grow older and become more of our own adults, we realize the reality, as you said, was they're humans too, full of fear, full of regret, full of fear of that they did the wrong thing or they raised their children the wrong way. They could have done something, woulda, coulda, shoulda. And if they're around to still communicate that, then yes, the responsibility is, once we've learned the language, is to approach them and teach them that, because that's what love is. But only if they're willing to listen. There are some parents out there that would just refuse, or like my parents, my dad's gone. My mom's Parkinson's. Her brain she can't communicate even as much as I try. So I think if they created that space for me, I think my dad was about to. And what a tease. I didn't get that space, but he was, I think, planting the seeds for it. And then it's like that. Now the only conversation I can have with him is the one I can imagine in my head.
Still beneficial though. I still think it's beneficial.
As I said, writing my book, it felt like I was talking to him, and having him there. You know what? The other book that I like to read, Life of Pi. Why not choose to worship that story? It's not as real as anything else.
Have you ever heard of quantum entanglement?
It sounds like something I would like.
Yeah. I was just thinking, I'm like, I bet he would like this. I'm fascinated by quantum physics. And my program was, you're not a good math student, from my mom and teachers and people like that. Yet I was very interested in all that. And my entire business runs off of formulas, my coaching business. Yeah. And so I enjoy the quantum field, because if everything is energy and vibration, like the entanglement part is the separation of the electrons, and them being able to communicate with each other separately as the same electron. So it's almost like telepathy. Or I was I was watching something a long time ago on ancient aliens, and how the rulers of the world, like nobility, were communicating through their crowns and their scepters and their electrons that were quantum entangled with alien, like crazy wacky shit. If you're into that, awesome. If you're not, still, it's the electrons splitting and still having the same amount of energy, yet it being over here in this vibrational level here and your vibrational field here, and it communicates. It's pretty neat.
Sure. You mentioned this tennis ball between you and your father. Like, you felt that. There was no actual tennis ball. You felt this force field, and you unlocked it with the key by saying the right thing with this conversation that dropped down this force field. That's a real thing. I don't think we have words yet to describe the receptors in our brain, but there are things that we can do with our brain now that 100 years ago, 200 years ago, it would be conceived as impossible to even conceive that there were stars, or that we can now calculate the Earth revolves around the sun. 100, 300, 400, 1,000 years ago, that I don't think we had the receptors to even conceive that. We were in Plato's cave. The concept of fire and tools. Now we can build computers or AI. I think this quantum entanglement is just a reference to, as I agree with you, the receptors that we haven't named yet. You walk into a cafe and you can tell which one sometimes is that person that you need to talk to. You walk down the street and you feel someone staring at you. Oh, you feel it. Even though they're not touching you, you can feel it. And there are times when when you meet someone that they're going to be with you for the rest of your life, whether it's something romantic or something spiritual, and you just can't tell. We just haven't named it yet, except what you say, quantum entanglement, I think is a good start.
Yeah, I've just been really watching a lot of stuff on quantum mechanics and just the the subatomic particles and just energy movement through cells and how it affects the body and how it affects the mind and the autonomic nervous system of a person and epigenetics. And I'm just fascinated with that kind of stuff. So when did you, obviously you aren't a bartender still, you went to medical school, became a doctor. How did that happen? And then what I read about was that you were doing that while traveling around the world. So let's mix those two in. I want to get to the part, just for the audience to know, you're an ER doctor during COVID.
Yeah.
And I want to get your experience. I don't want to take this thing down a hill though, so I want to be careful. I'm just really fascinated how you made it through all that psychologically. And when do you decide, you know what, I am going to make a choice for myself at this point and become a doctor?
No matter how downhill we get, let's just say I'm right now doing a virtual interview with you from the Faroe Islands with a group of 9
Yeah.
wonderful people, strangers, half of whom I just met 5 days ago, who are now going out on the town. It all will end well for people listening to this podcast. So we can talk COVID. We can talk about how we got there, and it's fascinating to look back and appreciate that I had no idea what I was doing. The moment that my dad died, I had no idea what 5 minutes ahead of me would look like. And instead of being anxious over it, which I still felt, I became comfortable feeling anxious over it and just really tried my best to focus on the present and invest as much as I can to it. So for an outsider looking in, it would just be a total mess. But for me, it's just connecting the dots when you look back on it. I was a bartender, and it will connect. I lost a bet at a bar to somebody where losing the bet would lead to me 36 hours later to be in Egypt with this person. Now, it wasn't because I wanted to go to Egypt or I loved traveling. At the time, I didn't like traveling. I didn't want to leave New York. I had never left New York. And during spring break, summers, and winter breaks, I would be Harry Potter staying on campus where everyone else traveled. But it wasn't until I lost that bet that I was like, you know what, I'm in a time in my life where I had to invest in my present, and I'd rather be a man of my word and $650 poor on this round trip flight that I found, that was part of the bet, than the guy that flakes and said, no, I was just kidding. So here I found myself in Egypt with this person. Was like, what's your name again? Barely knew this person. And, I spent 3 weeks alone after that person had to go, and came back realizing how much travel was going to be integral in my life. And I wouldn't have gotten there if it weren't for a random bet. It could have been anything, but she picked travel. We picked travel. And then that's when I realized, how would I know I'm not meant to be a doctor unless I do something similarly? Because I had already been very conclusive with, I'm going to be bartending the rest of my life. I'm never going to love traveling. I'm always going to stay in New York for the rest of my life. And these are things that were so fine, had a finality to it that I wasn't even sure. And it didn't take until my being dragged kicking and screaming because of a bet. And let's just be very fair, it was also because of a girl. She was the person I did a bet with. We ended up dating for 6 months afterwards, but that helped too. But the first week on that trip in Egypt, I hated traveling. I was like, I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I'm going to die. I was alone.
What was it?
It was
what was the hate?
The what?
What was the part that you hated?
Oh, that I was alone. When was there ever a time where I was by myself in a place where nobody knew me? I didn't know anyone. I didn't speak the language. And that's what I hated, was the fact that I was alone with myself, which is an analogy to hating myself. The only person I could talk to, hang out, was myself. And if I hated the first week of it, it was because I was not comfortable being alone with myself. And the second week, I was like, I'm getting the hang of this, because I was still alive. Just by virtue of breathing and being present, I'm like, oh, I'm still here. How grateful am I to not have been blown out of existence in this place where no one knew me. I didn't travel the phone. The bet was drop everything and go. I only had my backpack. I was off the grid. And it wasn't until 3 weeks in, I was like, okay, I love this, because I finally came back and said, and was able to look in the mirror, you're capable of surviving this. Therefore, you are more capable than you ever given yourself credit to. Why do more people believe in you? This random girl that made a bet with you at the bar believes in you more of the travel than you do. And that's when I realized, maybe I don't know everything. And maybe I'm meant to be a doctor. So the next part of the bet with her around and my brother and other people. It's like, well, what's next? You can be a bartender for the rest of your life? It's like, yeah, actually I will. But you know what? I'm going to keep doing and making these wagers. I'm going to apply to every med school that I'm willing to go with a subpar GPA, a below average MCAT score. Only got extracurriculars and my love for writing to my name. And I even wrote about this story to Egypt in my med school application, saying, this is my journey to becoming a doctor. I'm not sure, but here I am.
Yeah.
And that's what I think made me stand out. And a school took me. And just like Egypt, I got to keep going. And I know I have been granted an opportunity most people would kill for. And I didn't want to squander that. And if they see something in me, again, it brings me back. Why do these other people see more in me and believe in me more than I give myself credit for? And you just keep going and keep going. And this war of attrition. In that time, I had just discovered traveling. I was bartending, and I kept those things because I definitely wanted to keep those things in my pocket. Those things I know were my love languages, and I love to do. I'm not going to give those up. I didn't want to be that med student that quits everything that I knew made me happy for something I didn't know would bring me happiness. And then everyone said, well, you're not going to be able to do them all. 10 years later, here I am.
It's crazy to think about I felt that before traveling in Europe when I was 19. I felt like nobody knows me here. I'm nobody here. I'm just a person walking around. I'm surprised that you weren't used to that in a place like New York City where there's 1,000 people around you and you still feel alone. And it's interesting that vulnerability, that travel brought that piece out in you. Because I think that's what travel's designed for. I listened to an interview with Rick Steves the other day, and he talked about the first time his parents took him to Europe, and he realized that his mom was kind of overbearing. And that was when you had a child adult passport where your children were on the adult passport. And he realized that by the time he turns 18, he can get his own passport and he can come back to Europe. And Rick Steves, who has $100 million company a year, by the way, not a lot of people know that. He started with it being an escape from the overbearingness of his parents. And my question is, or what I'm curious about is, was it, obviously the bet wasn't an escape, yet when you got there, did you learn to love the escape from your traditional life back in New York, or were you loving the life back in New York?
Total freedom. That's the answer.
Yeah.
I think New York comes pretty close. I do get that from time to time in very obscure parts of the city, but I also grew up in New York, and there is an energy that I am on frequency with that feels familiar no matter where I am in New York. But keep in mind also, in New York, everyone speaks the same language as I do. I can read advertisements in the same language that I grew up with. But when you're traveling, not only do you not know anyone and nobody knows you, but you can't understand anything on TV or the billboards or a sign or be able to be reached if you decide to travel without a cell phone or any data. And that is total freedom. When you get to a point where the only person you can commune with is yourself and your own thoughts, that is as closest thing as we can get to a physical meditation outside of maybe of a Vipassana retreat or a physical meditation home, but you're really pulled out and physically in a three-dimensional space that's far away from home. And being able to only talk with yourself, that is it. That's freedom with you and yourself. I don't think anything else comes close unless you're in space alone. And but I think even in space, you're with actually colleagues that speak your language. You're not going to be completely alone. So you're in a foreign country. No one can talk with you, and therefore you can only rely on yourself. And I think that's freedom.
Yeah, dude. So there's a big self-trust piece in there that I felt that when I went to Russia when I was 19, and we missed our train coming back to Helsinki, and we had to rent this like mini bus, a bunch of students. It's like 6 of us or 8 of us, and we had to rent this mini bus. And you talk about worst case scenario, you now have a visa that's run out in Russia. You can't get out technically.
Yeah.
And the only way to get out is to drive through the Russian wilderness between Finland and the western part of Russia overnight. And just think about all the things that are going on out there. Look at a map. It's dense wilderness, right?
Yeah.
And I remember we would get to these checkpoints where they had a little hut where a guy lived with this like rabid, crazy dog. And he would get on and you would just slip some money into like your passport, and he would open your passport, grab the money, and he would just not look at the passport. And that happened about, I think, like 20 times. But I remember this very distinctly. I was really afraid because I'm like, fuck, my parents don't know where I am. I could die out here. They'll bury my body. They'll never know I existed.
Yeah.
My parents will spend the rest of their life searching for me. Oh my God, what did I just do? Because there were, at one checkpoint, every checkpoint had an anti-aircraft gun mounted to the road, right? To mow your ass down if you blow it.
Yeah.
And there were car carcasses on the side of the road that had been mowed down by this thing. And I'm thinking,
Mad
oh my
Max.
God, what's stopping this, right?
Yeah.
And so I dealt with this. I can't communicate. I can't read the signs. I can't call my parents. It's kind of like you and I talked about in the beginning with the boat, right? Your
Yeah.
30-foot waves in a 50-foot boat across the ocean. You have to figure something out within yourself to calm yourself, that internal panic down. And there's a connection that only travel, I think, can get you. Besides like plant medicine journeys, by the way. I'm talking like
but,
total
but that's
lucid.
but that's what they call them,
Yeah.
trips,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. True.
Tripping.
Yeah.
That's what they call them,
Yeah.
tripping. They don't use any other verb. You on a trip, man.
Fair.
What
That's
a trip.
fair.
Yeah.
That's fair. Dude, that's crazy.
Yeah.
So I want to make sure we have time to get to so you become a doctor, and now let's fast forward to 2020, because I've never talked to an ER doctor who went through COVID stuff. I think my biggest question as a human who went through that and understood that, and we had my wife had a baby right at the beginning of COVID.
Ooh.
Luckily, we were on the front end of the shutdown, and I was able to be in the room, and it was cool. How did you get through that? I mean, psychologically, you got trauma from your dad passing away. Now you are watching family members and other doctors and people that don't show up the next day that you just talked to or had lunch with. I mean, and the fatigue and the mental and the emotional, like, how did you work through that?
It's about being comfortable with the uncomfortable, making a habit out of that. And I think I had been very prepared through my father's death, and then living alone and trying to create a life out of that, to get to a point where once I felt alone again, and where I couldn't travel and depend on travel to reset my mental health, all I could do was to hone on past experiences of embracing discomfort and becoming, as you said, one with the waves, one with chaos. And going back to your Russia story, I know it's travel and whatnot, but we always say that at the end of the day, you can either have a good trip or a good story. That's the story you remember. If everything went hunky-dory and according to plan, you're going to be like, it was a good trip. You're not going to be bringing it up in a podcast with someone you just met. You are proud of that story. And I don't want to minimize what happened with COVID, because that was, people died. But the feeling of being comfortable with chaos and saying, we're going to get out of this, and I'm going to remember this, I'm going to honor it, I'm going to properly grieve it when it's time to. But until I get to that point, until I deserve that space to be able to grieve properly, I'm going to become one with chaos and just go with the waves. Because if I freak out or leave or not show up to work, because I had the means to, as a per diem doctor, I could have chosen not to show up. I didn't never sign a full-time contract. I ended up with my freedom to work wherever I wanted, showing up more often in more places than I expected to, because by being comfortable with chaos, I got on this frequency where I was like, I need to be there, because I don't want to sit at home if I don't have to be, and try to figure out from the safety of things in this unknown. I want to be there. I want to see my enemy, and I want to know as much as I can out of it, so I can fully and properly overcome this as quickly as possible, even though that could be putting myself in harm's way. And that was a surprise to me, because as a per diem doctor, I thought I signed up as a per diem after residency before COVID, because if there were a pandemic, I could be like sitting back and like, nope, not taking part of this one, not going to hurt my family and whatever. And, be in the safety, because I don't have to go to work. No one's telling me to, because I didn't sign a full-time contract. The irony is I ended up going more often to more different places, which actually gave me a better understanding that what I was experiencing at one hospital was what every hospital is going through. to compare, a full-time doctor is in their silo of their community institution. They feel like, oh, this is only happening in my hospital, that we don't have enough PPE or masks, or I'm wearing trash bags. Where I was getting the big picture, and I was like, no, this is not personal. It's bad everywhere. And knowing that, I was much more comfortable in knowing that it was something that it was out of my hands, it was out of my control. And what I can control for is at least showing up, and showing up is half the battle. And the more comfortable I became with something like COVID during a time when it was so uncomfortable, I feel that I was able to survive it, mental health wise, better than if I were just to stay at home and just wonder, what could have been, what could I do, or what is going on. And, I credit that to a lifetime of always running towards the fire ever since my dad died, running towards Egypt, running towards med school. When I wasn't sure, the poison cup, just pick one.
Right. Yeah, man, that's so interesting though. Like the thing that I was thinking when I read your bio was, how did people keep showing up? How did you go home like after a 40-hour or 50-hour, stint? Like how did you remain in integrity to your commitment? Obviously, without the contract, let's forget about that.
Yeah.
I'm talking like your commitment as a doctor to help people, right? The is it Hippocratic Oath? No. Yes.
Yeah, the Hippocratic Oath. Yeah.
Yeah. What that tests your integrity probably beyond your dad, probably beyond travel and the fear of both and the trauma of those type of things, because you're seeing so much chaos.
Yeah.
What was the link that kept your integrity intact? Do you know?
It's love. As cheesy as that sound and contrived as that may be, it's love. Like, what makes you show up to your relationship every day, even when it gets hard, even when they may annoy the crap out of you, even when things are not going the way you want or you're fighting, you still show up. And there's some maturity of locking yourself in the cage and throwing out the key because you're not going to leave the room, because you want to make it work. And that's love. And I mean, that's very easy to apply to a relationship. But what about my relationships to my colleagues, my city, my community? And that's what surprised me, because I thought, really, when the pandemic came around, I was like, wow, at least I'm per diem, so I know when to give myself breaks and, just check in. If I may have caught COVID, I can take a few days off to myself and not worry about breaking a contract or violating my full-time commitment to a hospital system. But what happened and surprised me, like love usually does to anyone, it surprises you. The temporary form of insanity known as love, I ended up going every day. I think I took only like, I don't know, I worked 35 days of the first 50 days of COVID, where most people full-time doctors work only 10 days a month. And I worked a lot, and it's love in the way that's war, right? COVID's always been compared to war. It was something that involved the entire country. There was the front lines, there was the home front. People were doing their part at home by staying and making PPE, and we were on the front line. So a lot of analogies to war. And that's the case, then why do soldiers keep going back when you ask them that? And it's comparatively, using that analogy, they say it's for their brothers, for the person next to them, for their brethren. It's the love for them. Regardless of the politics or whether they believe in the mission or the big reason why they're there, they do it for the person next to them. And they call that love as well. If we're going to use that analogy, then I will embrace that full-heartedly.
Sure.
That it was love that made me go in every day.
No, I like that, man. And you watched a lot of people pass away. Your grandfather passed away of COVID, and you weren't with him, but you monitored him. You watched fellow doctors and nurses die. I mean, you were prepared for that. Unfortunately, you had to deal with the preparation when you were young. However, it prepared you to probably be a great leader in the organizations that you went to. And as a per diem doctor, you worked all over the city of New York, right? And you just, what do you do? Like call up and say, hey, is there a spot to fill? Or like, how do you do that?
They just text me, doctor got sick, can you cover?
Let's go.
Or I have a fever, can you come? And I'm like, yo, I can't be two places at once. And I got to just pick the one that, like, whoever first come, first served. Or they have hazard pay, and they're like, I'll pay you double if you come in for 3 hours. And I would go to two different hospitals or do two different shifts in a single, like, 12-hour period sometimes. Like I want to make both parties happy. So I'll show up here for a couple hours, make you happy, and then I'm going to take a cab and go to this hospital, make you happy, so that you feel like I've been putting out fires everywhere. I learned how to enjoy that. Enjoy is a weird word, but like tried to reframe that experience as something like I'm curious. I want to know what's going on in this hospital, in that borough, so that I have the best picture in mind. And enjoying the fact that I can get my hands on different PPE, because one hospital wouldn't have face shields, another one wouldn't have masks, but they would have the other thing the other would have. So I'll just grab a bunch and give it to others, or vice versa, or cobble my own PPE out of different places. It's like an Iron Man suit. So those are all little things that help me get by all those trauma that I was seeing from all these people dying. It was like, how can I help? How can I put out the fire the best I can for my colleagues that were getting sick?
I guess it's your choice. Is you're either going to sit in it and like suffer in it, or you're going to do something about it. And you chose to do something about it, which is a great metaphor for life anyway, when shit's going down. And it sounds like travel, going to 5-10 different hospitals regardless would be challenging, because you have to learn the wings, you have to learn the systems, the different systems, the different nurses, and then you throw COVID on top of it in a worldwide pandemic. It's almost like travel prepared you for that part, to be comfortable in any environment when you don't understand the layout and may not speak the language with that team of nurses or PAs. Yeah. And then the situation with your father prepared you to deal with your own mortality, fears. It's really interesting the way that your life kind of sets you up. You know, the stuff in the past sets you up for your future. It's really interesting.
Yeah, the seed was planted, and without really knowing where it was going to lead. But at the end of the day, if you've had all the answers of what things happen now would mean in the future, there would be no interest. There would be no surprises. And I'm grateful for those seeds planted. And, even Steve Jobs says the dots don't make sense when you try to connect them moving forward. They make sense when you look back and connect them looking backwards. Oh, this is why. Maybe it took 18 years to get there, 14 years to get there, but it does come full circle eventually. Just trust the process. If you truly trust yourself, and as a man in this world, trusting yourself, trust the process, and the universe will conspire with you to make sense of everything, even if it doesn't make sense in the moment.
Couldn't have spoken it better myself. So real quick, as we wrap up, 200 countries you've been to
in the last 12 years, countries and territories, because some people, Antarctica doesn't count as a country and Greenland doesn't count as a country, but I do, because it took a lot of effort to get to those places. So that counts in the number.
Love it, man. Absolutely love it. What's your favorite country?
It's like asking who's my favorite person or choosing your favorite child. They're all my favorites in different ways. And if I don't like something, it's probably something I was going through and I got to try it again. But the country I go back to over and over and over and over again is India, or South Asia in general, because I've been in Pakistan now as often as I've been to India. But that region, as well as the Middle East, have been, something that I find myself bringing, just crossing paths with more often than anywhere else. But, Budapest is my favorite European city. Slovenia was the most unexpectedly amazing weekend that I had there. Cuba was the most fun. New Zealand is the most magical. Spain, Iran has the best food, or Japan, and not best food, but also the most convenient. I mean, everyone has their own little superlatives I can give little awards to. It's not just one.
That's so cool, man. That's so cool. Look, this has been a really awesome conversation with you, and I'm like, it's just so cool to know that there are humans on the planet like you who not only have this path and this purpose for their personal life, they also have this beautiful alignment with their professional life. And to see that as an example with someone that didn't have to do that, you could have wallowed in your shit and blamed the world for all your problems and your pain. It's really nice to know that there's somebody out there that owns their paths and is helping other people on theirs too. And it's so cool to meet you, man.
Thanks. No, the pleasure is mine. It's a back and forth, and you gave me some insights. I took some notes. So believe me, it's mutual. So thank you for this opportunity.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, Dr. Calvin Sun, it's a pleasure. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. Real quick, tell people where they can find you. Is it Monsoon? I'm going to butcher this. Tell us where we can find your book and other stuff about monsoondiaries.com.
Yeah, depending on when you're listening to this, I have a book coming out released by HarperCollins, Harper Horizon, on September 27th. Also part of the crazy story of how things came to me. I wasn't looking to make a book, and someone approached me, and 2 years later, it's going to be on shelves September 27th. And you can find it on my website, monsoondiaries.com, or my Instagram, Facebook, Twitter handles, all is Monsoon Diaries. MONSOONDIARIES. Take Monsoon Wedding plus Motorcycle Diaries, mash them together. Monsoon Diaries.
Nice. It's awesome, man. Well, audience, really appreciate you listening. Remember, be purposeful can become irreplaceable. And we love you. We appreciate you. And we'll catch you on the next one.